What's up, guys? How we doing? Yeah, I feel the ssame way. I'm not even going to get on you for not even responding because I'm like, yeah. Someone asked during the Connect 15, what do you think for? I'm thankful for an iPhone that automatically changes time because I would still be sleeping right now if it hadn't. So grateful that you're here. My name's Justin. I'm one of the pastors here at Hope City. And if you are a guest, we'd love to meet you. We moved the Next Step table into the lobby. So it's right back there at that big blue sign if you're in the room. If you're not in the room and you're watching online, you got to do us a favor. Take a picture of you enjoying the service in your jammies with your coffee and tag Hope City Indy on Instagram or Facebook, just so we can wish that we were at home with you today, all right? Grateful that for those of you that are joining us online as well. Hey, before we dive in, I just want to say a huge thank you. We took a special offering last week for Mission to Ukraine. Mission to Ukraine is a missions organization that Trish and I have known about for the better part of 20 years, and had served with them at a previous church that we were at. And last week we came to you and said, hey, could you guys give over and above your regular offering, or your regular giving to Mission to Ukraine as they're trying to meet needs on the ground right now. And we were able to take a check for a little over $1,800 this last week to the director of Mission Ukraine, as well as some handwritten notes that you guys wrote last Sunday to their staff that is on the ground in Ukraine. The director, Ira, has put up some just unbelievable videos of planes flying over and dropping bombs, like literally in the frame of the video on Facebook. And so continue to pray for Ukraine. And I just want to say thank you guys so much for stepping up and being generous. Well, we are in week 2 of this series called Let It Go. And last week, if you weren't here, we talked about this idea of letting go of control. And it was really kind of a challenging morning, but it was also a powerful morning because we identified the things in our life that we are not meant to control, that we try to control, and then we said, God, would you give us the courage and the humility to surrender those to you? And if you weren't here, I'd love to encourage you to go back and catch up on week 1 of that series. And we're going to be in this right up until Easter. And I think it's going to be powerful as we come together each week and identify these things in our life, these things that reside in our heart that maybe we're not even aware of, that we need to let go of in order to receive and experience a resurrection. And so in order for us to bring something back to life, it has to die first. And so we're asking God to let go of those things in our life that need to die so that we can live the new life that we have in Him. And it's going to help us improve our relationship with God. It's going to help us improve our relationship with others as we let these things go. And so today, as Wes said, we're talking about cynicism. And some of you are like, cynical about even talking about cynicism. Like, I don't even struggle with cynicism. Why are we even talking about cynicism? I don't struggle with cynicism. Well, that's cynical of you to think that, all right? And so if you're thinking that, you are a cynical person. But it's going to be hopefully a great day as we talk about something that I think we all struggle with, but none of us really start out struggling with. Control, I think, is one of those things that is innately born into us. Cynicism is something that you grow into over time, right? No one started out distrusting. No one started out feeling like they could not really move forward without questioning everything. We grow into cynicism over the time, the older that we get. My guess is you've said the familiar sayings of cynicism that go like this: oh, that will never happen. Someone gives you some good news, well, that would never be me, right? That always happens to me. I'll believe it when I see it. It'll always be this way. It's just how my life goes. I'm cursed. The worst always happens to me. See, none of us start out saying those things. But the older that we get and the more wounds that we experience, the more cynical we become. Now, just to get on the same page, I want to define for you what cynicism is, okay? This is how Webster's defines it. Distrustful of human nature and or motives. Distrustful of human nature and or motives. Cynicism is the opposite of believing the best. It's actually believing the worst. It's assuming the worst of others. It's assuming the worst of circumstances. It's questioning the motives of someone. It's doubting the outcome of situations. It's starting from a disposition of suspicion or distrust. That's what cynicism is. So this week, I wanted to do a scientific study on whether or not I struggle with cynicism. And so we have a family group chat text in our family that includes my wife of 27 years almost, 3 adult kids, 25, 22, and 19, and 2 daughters-in-law. And so I thought, if anyone is going to be honest with me about whether or not I struggle with cynicism, it will be them. And so I sent a text message earlier in the week, and I said, hey guys, I'm working on a message on cynicism. I need your help. I want you to be honest with me. Gentle, but honest. Other than high school officiating, what do you think I am cynical of in life? And it was crickets for like 3 hours. And so I'm just like, somebody get some guts, right? Somebody be honest with me. Let's go. But I'm not going to say anything because I'm not going to control it because I already gave that up last week, all right? Trying to control family was what I wrote down and gave away. So I'm not going to do that. And so I just let it sit there. And finally, after a few hours, one of my sons texted and said, Dad, I'm just going to be honest with you. I don't think you're a cynical person at all. It's like you're one of the most optimistic people. You believe the best about others. You believe the best about situations. He's like, and this is coming from a very cynical person. My daughters-in-law and my other two sons, they were fearful. They didn't say a word, all right? They didn't acknowledge that. I think my daughters-in-law didn't think they were in the family long enough to say anything. My other two sons just don't like confrontation, so they just quieted up. My wife completed the assignment because she hearted it and then put an arrow up and said this, all right? So she got out of the conversation, but technically, agreed with my son. And you know what I thought when he first said that? My first thought was, what does he want? Right? Like, I'm cynical about his response, and I'm not cynical, right? I was like, what does he want? Is he just buttering me up? What does he really want? What is his motives? Why is he really saying I'm not cynical? Because he thinks that I am? He's just quietly trying to get other people to disagree with him? Right? I'm cynical about his response. And here's the deal. I've never wanted to be cynical. I've never wanted to be a cynical person. My dad was the most cynical person I've ever met. And it was embarrassing how cynical he was. We didn't go out to eat. I've mentioned this before. We didn't go out to eat a lot when I was growing up. In fact, other than being after funerals, I don't have one memory of actually going to a sit-down restaurant and having a waitress or waiter come and wait on me. Like, that just didn't happen when we were growing up. Now, when I got into college and started playing basketball, and we would travel some, and my parents would come to away games or come over to the school and visit, we would go out to dinner after the games. But when I was growing up, it never happened, thank God. And because then my dad wouldn't have more opportunities to accost the servers. So when Trish and I started dating, and we started getting serious about one another, we wanted to kind of have our families meet, get to know one another, because it was, this was kind of moving in a direction. And so Trish's family's from Joliet, Illinois. I'm from Crawfordsville. And so we thought, let's meet at the Chili's in Lafayette. And there was 11 of us, her 2 siblings, her 2 parents, and her, my 3 siblings, myself, and my 2 parents. And so we go to this Chili's, and from the very beginning of us sitting down, my dad is in rare form. He's complaining about the seating. He's complaining about the tables. He's complaining about everything. And as it goes on, he just starts chirping and chirping and chirping. The drinks can't be filled fast enough, and the food can't come out quick enough. And he just kind of goes on and on and on. And I'm just burying my head like, Dad, these people are just meeting you for the first time. Just fake it. Just pretend like you're a happy person, right? Just pretend like you're not a grumpy old man, because that's what you're being right now. So it goes on throughout the whole meal, and it hasn't become to the point of embarrassment at this point. And so finally, at the end of the meal, the waitress comes over, and she says, do you guys need anything else? My dad's like, no, we're good. So she leaves, and a manager comes over. I guess my dad had said enough throughout the meal that the manager wanted to come over and make sure everything was okay. And the manager made a fatal flaw. He said, was everything okay today? Which, if you're a nice person, a Christian, just really an American, you would say, yeah, it's fine, right? Like, that's what you would say. Not my dad. He says, well, do you really want the truth? And my siblings and I are like, no, he doesn't want the truth. He doesn't. Lie to him. My dad's like, these fries sucked. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Dad. And everybody at the table just kind of put their heads down, right? And that's just how my dad was. You know what? He complained enough that he got the whole meal comped, which was, I think, his mission all along. And so my family has turned my dad into a verb in our household. All right? So if we have poor service and we go out to eat, my family will see me getting frustrated and they'll say, Dad, don't go all Ed Davis on them. All right? That's how they use my dad. It's not a term of endearment. All right? It's a term of don't embarrass us by being so cynical. And as much as I've tried over the years, I have become more cynical than I want to be. And my guess is you have too. You've had a moment where someone said something that they didn't live up to. You've had a moment that someone did something or didn't do something that they promised they would do, and you've allowed distrust to grow in your heart. You've gotten cynical. And there's a progression to cynicism. Cynicism doesn't just come at us all at once. It progresses over time. And the first wave of cynicism starts with this. You're surprised by life. You get surprised by life's circumstances. You graduate from college, right? And you spend a ton of money on this college degree, or your parents have, or you've borrowed a ton of money to get this college degree. And you think to yourself, I'm not going to live in my parents' basement. I'm going to go out, I'm going to get a job. I'm going to go and do what I'm passionate about. I'm not going to go into some dead-end job like my dad did or my mom did. I'm going to go and I'm going to find a job that really awakens me to the person that God has created me to be. And then you know what happens? You can't find a job. And you end up living in your parents' basement. And you're surprised at how much rejection you've experienced even though you work so hard. Maybe for some of you, you are in this dating relationship and you really thought it was going to go in a direction of marriage. And that was what you were talking about. That's what you were working toward. That's the direction that you were going. And then out of nowhere, this person just says, it's not you, it's me. And they break it off. Right? And you've given so much time and so much of your heart to this person. You can't imagine starting over with somebody else because they just ripped your heart out. Maybe for some of you, you are married. And you thought, you know what, when we get married, we're never going to argue like my parents argue. We're never going to fight. We're always going to go to bed happy. We're always going to get along. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be blissful. And then you know what happens? You get back from the honeymoon. Right? Like after 24 hours, you realize this ain't going that direction because you're married to a flawed human being. And now your goal isn't not just to not have an argument. Your goal is to get through the weekend without an argument. Right? Maybe for some of you, you've been surprised by life when it comes to kids. Because you were going to get married and you're going to have a family, you're going to build a family. And for whatever reason, you haven't been able to have kids. And that has been such an unwelcome surprise. Maybe you tried to adopt internationally or through foster care, and it just keeps blowing up in your face. And you're like, God, I'm trying to do the right thing here. Maybe for some of you, you did have kids, and you were going to be the perfect parent. And your kids were going to just have everything they wanted. You're going to provide for every need. You're going to give them a better life than you had. And you worked so hard, and you spent so much time, and you invested so much. And then they made some really bad decisions. They're not really the perfect kids that you thought they would be, or you're not the perfect parent that you thought you would be. Maybe you have a strained relationship with an adult child. And you've been surprised by life. And that leads to the next step of cynicism. You get hurt by others. Right? Circumstantially, we get surprised. Things come out of left field. Things come out of nowhere. You get fired. You get, surprised. But then you can also be wounded. People let you down. They say things that are hurtful or untrue. They don't show up when they promise to show up. They walk out when the going gets tough. They don't keep their word. They say things behind your back. They post ugly things on social media. They take advantage of you. They're unfaithful to you. They're disloyal to you. They break up with you. They take you for granted. They take advantage of you. They fire you, or they don't hire you, or they promote someone over you. And over the course of time, you have this disposition that people can't be trusted. The wounds that you've accumulated over time, sometimes from the people that you love the most, has caused you to have a disposition toward everyone of suspicion or distance. You build a wall around your heart, and you're suspicious of everyone, their motives and their intentions, which leads to the next stage of cynicism. That's gnawing negativity. Gnawing negativity. My guess is you know someone who is negative about everything. They're probably in your family, right? You can't go to a family gathering without them complaining about something. The food, the weather, the government, right? The gas prices, which is, everybody gets a pass on that right now. You can complain about gas prices all day long. I don't mind, right? They can find the one thing that's negative. Every family has that person. And if you're having trouble right now identifying that person, it's probably you, okay? Because somebody's thinking of you right now when they think of that negative person. When I graduated from college, I started as a youth pastor in Sandusky, Ohio. And the church was like 130 years old. And that was kind of the average age of the church, too. It was a super old church. In fact, Micah was actually born, our 25-year-old son was actually born in Sandusky. We moved there in May when Trish was pregnant. He was born in July. And the church was so old from an average age standpoint He was the only kid from nursery to fourth grade. There were no kids in the church at all till fourth grade. And like we were closer in age to the junior hires in our youth ministry than we were to any of the other adults. I mean, it was an old church. And I remember thinking, after being there a few months, like, don't these people love God? Why are they so mean? Why are they so angry? Why are they so defensive? Why can they not embrace change at all? And now, after 25 years of parenting and 25 years of relationships and 25 years of ministry and 25 years of being hurt and surprised by life, you know what I think? It's not that big of a jump. It's actually just little small steps along the way. And if we don't guard our heart, if we don't identify the cynicism in our heart, it begins to overtake us, and we become people that we never set out to become. All of us are affected by cynicism. All of us wrestle with it. And we justify it by saying, well, it's just a defense mechanism, or, hey, we're just being a realist. But the reality is, we're just becoming cynics. A few years ago, we had a couple that started coming to Hope City. And immediately when they came, super talented couple, they dove into starting serving, and they joined a connection group at one of our connection group sign-up times and started getting involved in a connection group. And almost immediately, within a couple of months of them joining a connection group, the connection group leaders reached out to Trish and I and said, hey, we need to meet with you. We need to talk to you about our group and just some of the dynamics in our group. And so we get together and we start talking, and they bring up this couple and just how they have a ton going against them. They have a ton going on, and the church really needs to rally around them and help them, and how can we help them? And I said, well, give me some things of what's going on. Like, well, their marriage is in trouble. It's just a train wreck. And they really need some help, and we don't really know if, small group is the time to do marriage counseling. And so, Trish and I will reach out to them. That's fine. We'll start meeting with them. So we reached out to them. A few weeks later, a few months later, one of the guy loses his job. It's unexpected, surprised by life type of circumstances, and now they're really struggling financially. So one of the guys in the connection group actually gives him some work to do, pays him to come and do some work at his house. Another guy in the church that's not even in that group pays him to come and do some work for him. And then they start having medical issues. And so the loss of the job and the medical issues and the medical bills, they have to move out of their house. And so you know what the small group does? They collect money. They give them gift cards, and they give them monetary gifts to try to help them pay their bills. They go and help them move from one house to another. My family goes and helps them move from one house to another. And they're super appreciative. You know what happens next? The care team gets behind them. They say, hey, we want to help you guys with Christmas. We're going to provide Christmas for you this year. Don't even have to worry about it. And they get other small groups involved, and they start giving them Christmas gifts. And we start, planning out how we're going to help them going into the new year. And they really, really appreciated it until they left the church and said the church didn't care about them. Now, you have that happen more than once, and you start to think, can people be trusted? And I'm sure you could recount a story for me of something like that in your life, where you gave to something or someone or a job or a person or a relationship, and it just blew up. And you start equating every relationship with that broken one, and you become cynical. See, Carey Nieuwhof says this about cynicism. He says, cynicism begins not because you don't care, but because you do. Right? The things that you and I are cynical about the most, we may not care right now, but we started out caring. If you're cynical about your marriage, you love this person, right? You cared about your marriage more than anything else. And now you're just like, this is as good as it's going to be. If you're cynical about your job, there was a point in your life where you had a white-hot vision for your career, and now you're just putting in your time to get through the day. If you're cynical about dating, you had an optimism that you were going to meet the person of your dreams, and now you're just trying not to get hurt in a relationship. Right? The things that you care about the most sometimes make us the most cynical. So cynicism isn't because we don't care. Cynicism is because we cared so much, we were vulnerable, and then we got hurt. So think about every person or every situation in your life that you're cynical about. My guess is, at one point, and maybe even now, it was really close to your heart. Can I give you a few phrases that cynics say just so you can identify if this is you? Cynics often say, well, of course it is. Of course it is. It's raining. Of course it is. I just washed my car. I'm just past the 24-hour time of getting a free car wash. Of course it's raining. The stock market's down. Of course it is. I just reallocated more money to my 401k. Of course the stock market's down. The boss is here. Of course he is. I didn't even dress up on Microsoft Teams today. I'm in sweats. Of course the boss is going to pop into this meeting. Right? We have a test today. Of course we do. I didn't study at all. I'm going to fail this test. Of course it is. Cynics say it will never or it will always. Our marriage will never be fixed. Our marriage will never be better. Our kids will always be screw-ups. I'll never get promoted. We're always going to be in debt. Cynics take a circumstance that they're experiencing in a moment in time, and they stretch it out over all of time. That's what happens when we're cynical. Cynics say, God would never. God would never love me. God would never forgive me. God would never bless me. God would never choose me. God will never help me. God will never show up for me. So let me ask you, are you a cynic? If you're still having trouble determining whether you're a cynic, I have a scale for you that will help put it in better terms. Okay? So Tigger is not a cynic, okay? He is bouncing off the walls literally, all right? He has way too much coffee. He doesn't even care about daylight savings time because he's high energy all the time. And then you have Eeyore where the world is falling apart, right? Like he can't find happiness or joy in anything. And you know what Eeyores do? They hang out with happy people. They hang out with Tiggers. They hang out with Winnie the Poohs. They hang out with people who have a great outlook on life, and then they're always pointing out the problems, right? That's what Eeyores do. So where are you on this scale? If some of you are elbowing your spouse or the person next to you, hey, maybe they're trying to be honest with you, a little bit more honest than my family was being with me. See, here's what the deal with cynicism. Cynicism starts on the outside, but it always makes its way to the inside. See, cynicism, when we don't identify it, it moves from our circumstances to our hearts. And when you allow cynicism to move from your circumstances to your heart, it begins to affect your faith. You have no joy, you have no hope, you have no peace. You struggle with anxiety. Look at what Proverbs 11:27 says. It says, if you search for good, you will find favor. But if you search for evil, it will find you. What's Solomon saying in Proverbs? He's saying, hey, just put on some rose-colored glasses and just pretend everything's okay? No, he's saying you're going to get what you're looking for. You're going to find what you're looking for. If you're constantly looking at the mistakes that your spouse are making, you know what you're going to see all the time? The mistakes your spouse is making. If you're constantly looking at how much you hate your job or how many times your coworkers annoy you, you're constantly going to be annoyed by your coworkers. If you're constantly pointing out the flaws of a family member, you're always looking at the negative, you know what you're always going to see? Despite how well they love you, despite anything that they do for you, you're always going to see their flaws. If you look for evil, it will find you. But if you look for the good, you're going to find favor. It doesn't negate the bad. It just allows you to focus on what you need to focus on to maximize that relationship. It doesn't excuse the bad. It doesn't make the bad okay. It's not that we don't experience hardship. We just don't allow that to identify us. So with the time that we have left, I want to look at a passage of Scripture that's written by King David in the Old Testament. And you talk about a guy that experienced ups and downs in life. I mean, David experienced all kinds of highs and all kinds of lows. His life was like a roller coaster, emotionally, circumstantially. From a financial standpoint, David experienced every single high and every single low that you can in every single area of his life. He starts out, we come to know David as a shepherd. He's a shepherd because he's the youngest of all of his family, and they don't have time for him. They don't identify him as a leader. They don't really think much of him, so they send him out as a teenager to look after the sheep. And you know what happens? Which is kind of a low, right? Samuel, the prophet, comes to the house of Jesse, which is David's dad, and he says, hey, I'm here to anoint a new king, which you think would be good news. And Jesse doesn't even think to call David in from the field because he doesn't even think of him as a king. That's bad news, right? It's kind of a low. Your dad doesn't think much of you. And so David is anointed king. That's great. That's a high, except he has to wait years before he becomes king. That's kind of low. And so one day he's door dashing some food to his brothers on the battlefield, And you know what happens? He gets ticked off that Goliath is taunting the Israelite army, and so he just takes matters into his own hand and he kills Goliath, becomes a war hero, becomes a legend. That's a pretty high. So he's invited to the palace to live. That's a pretty high as well. Until the king gets jealous of him and wants to kill him. That's a pretty low. And he starts running for his life. But then David, you know what happens? Saul dies and David becomes king. That's a pretty high. Until his son wants to take the throne from him and starts chasing him to try to kill him. That's a pretty low when your son tries to kill you. So David has experienced every single emotion that you and I can experience, even cynicism. And here's what's so amazing. He writes about it. And God includes it in his word. And that's what I love about the word of God. It's not sanitized, it's not cleaned up, it's not polished, it's not the best parts of humanity. It's authentic. And it speaks directly to our heart. And that's what David does in Psalm 13, verses 1 through 4. It says this: "O Lord, how long will you forget me?" He doesn't say, "Oh, most gracious Heavenly Father." He doesn't get into his prayer voice. You know what I'm talking about? You have people in your life that have a prayer voice, or they talk like a regular person and still pray. "Dear Lord of God in heaven, almighty." No, that's not David. David's like, "God, how long are you going to forget me? How long are you going to leave me hanging? How long are you going to kick me to the curb? Let's have a conversation, God." Forever? He just tosses out a little time frame there. Eternity? Right? How long are you going to forget me, God? Till the end of time? Right? That's what cynics do. When you're in a cynical place, you take one moment of time and you stretch it out over every moment of time. Are you going to forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? Now, this phrase, hide your face, in Hebrew, it literally means, how long are you going to curse me? How long am I going to be cursed? See, when God hid his face from you, it means he removed his presence from you. And when God removed you from his presence, you were cursed. You were eternally cursed, the Hebrews believed. And so David is saying, hey, how long are you going to remove me from your presence? How long am I going to be cursed? You ever say that to yourself? I'm cursed. I'm just cursed. Flat tire, cursed. Late for work, cursed. Right? Dishwasher going out, I'm just cursed. It's just my life. That's just what happens to me. Break up, cursed. Right? Someone gets promoted at your job, I'm just cursed. My boss doesn't see me. My boss doesn't know me. My boss doesn't like me. I'm just cursed. That's what David's doing here. He's saying, God, how long are you going to curse my life? And then he does what all of us do. He decides who he's going to assign blame to. When you and I feel cursed, when you and I feel overlooked, when you and I feel cynical, we identify a person to blame, and David is pointing the finger at God and saying, this is on you. How long are you going to do this to me? Nobody else to blame. I'm not blaming King Saul. I'm not blaming my son. I'm not blaming all the broken relationships in my life. How long are you going to do this to me, God? You know why we go there? Because many of us who are people of faith, we know that God has the power to do something, and we question his sovereignty when he doesn't do something. And we become cynical. It's not that we don't think that God has power. We know he has power. We're just judgmental of him for not using it at our discretion. Right? And that's what makes us cynical. And that's exactly what David is doing. Verse 3, he says, look on me. Now that could literally be translated, look at me. Look at me, God. Look at me and answer me. Give light to my eyes or I will sleep in death. And he's not talking about a physical death. Literally, this is the best way that the English translators could translate the Hebrew. What it literally means is more of a mental death, an emotional death. What he's basically saying is, look at me and answer me, or I'm going to slip into a depression. I'm going to be depressed if you don't come through. He says, don't let my enemies gloat saying, we've defeated him. Don't let them talk about behind my back. Don't let them talk trash to me. Don't let them get the upper hand. Don't let them have the last word. Don't let them rejoice at my downfall. You ever feel like there are people in your life that are just waiting for you to fail, just so they can point it out? There are people at work just waiting for you to mess up. There are people in your family, I told you so. I told you he was toxic. I told you that was a bad financial decision. I told you. And David's saying, hey, how long are you going to let my enemies taunt me? How long are they going to have the last word? They're laughing at me, God, and it's all your fault. Now, I don't know what happens between verse 4 and verse 5, but something happens. I don't know how long it is. I journal from, most mornings I try to journal. Sometimes it's 3 to 4 times a week. but I always have my journal sitting there. And there will be times where I'm writing out a prayer and I'm in mid-prayer and the dogs need to go out. I'm in mid-prayer and the kids wake up. I'm in mid-prayer and it's time to take the kids to school. I'm in mid-prayer and something happens, I get interrupted, and I put my journal down and I come back to it. I don't know if that's what happens here, if David goes away, or if God just kind of shows up with his Holy Spirit and just ministers to David's heart. But where he goes from verse 4 to verse 5 is the key to laying down cynicism. And here's what David says in verse 5. But I trust in your unfailing love. Why is that so important? Does anything in the first 4 verses of this chapter give you any indication that David is in a trustworthy place with God? No. I don't think he feels like God can be trusted. I think he's commanding himself to trust God, despite his circumstances, despite how he feels. And that's oftentimes how our faith is exercised. That's oftentimes how the demon of cynicism is exercised out of us. We have to tell ourselves that God is trustworthy even when we don't feel like he is trustworthy. Why? So we can live kind of like, just this state of denial? No. Because it's God's unfailing love that sustains us. He says, I will rejoice because you've rescued me. Now here's the principle I want you to get from this passage. Cynicism takes our past failures and projects them into future results. That's what cynicism does. But here's the big key if you struggle with cynicism. David is taking God's past faithfulness and projecting it into his future hope. Cynicism is all about you and what you've experienced. What the shift that David has is he takes his circumstances, he sets them aside, he says, I'm going to focus on God's unfailing love. I'm going to trust in that. And I'm going to project that into my future hope. Does it change his circumstances? Absolutely not. I don't think. It probably just changes his heart. I don't know that his circumstances change. I don't know that his relationships change. But the disposition of his heart definitely is transformed. So, just like we did last week, I want to give you 3 questions to ask yourself if you struggle with cynicism and you want to lay it down. You want to let it go. Here's how to let go of cynicism. The first is this. What are you cynical about? What are you cynical about? You got to give it a name. Maybe you got to give them a name. Maybe it's a person. Maybe it's a circumstance. What are you cynical about? Can you identify it? In the first 2 years of Hope City, I did 4 weddings for couples that attended Hope City, which is kind of, that's not a lot, but if you consider the church was less than 2 years old, it is kind of a lot. And so these couples, they attended Hope City, they were here regularly, and they asked me to do their wedding, and they came to Hope City literally until after I did their wedding. And then they didn't come back. In fact, one couple, I never even heard from them again. I literally did their wedding, went to the reception, never saw them or heard from them again. I'm like, did my wedding really stink that bad? Like you're never going to come back? They were greeters, they were in a small group, ghosted, just never even texted, called, never returned calls, just nothing. I still to this day don't even know why they left. I'm like, man, if I really am that bad of a wedding officiant, I'm so sorry, right? Like I had no idea. I had no clue what happened. Another couple, they started coming together right after the church started. And they attended faithfully, got engaged while they were at our church, asked me to do the wedding. She was a volunteer in Hope City Kids. I do the wedding. The reception is awesome. We're all at the reception. 2 weeks after the honeymoon, we're short on Hope City Kids volunteers. Our Hope City Kids director at the time was Holly Davidson. Holly calls her and says, hey, could you serve at Hope City Kids this weekend? And she said, well, we don't go to Hope City anymore. I was like, oh, I didn't know that. She's like, yeah, when we were engaged, Hope City was a good enough church for us, but now that we're married, we need something more. So that's how I found out that they didn't even go anymore. Holly called her to volunteer. Another couple, they started coming. He was actually coming to Hope City. He meets a girl, I think online, that goes to another mega church in town. They're dating. He's involved. She starts coming. They go back and forth for a little while, and then she starts coming to Hope City, and they get engaged. And I'm so happy for them. And so we start meeting together, do premarital counseling. Like on the 3rd premarital counseling appointment, she says, I'm just going to be honest with you. The reason that we're here at Hope City is because the church that I was going to, they don't marry divorced people. It's both of our second weddings, and so you'll marry us, so we're coming here. This is our church home now. I was like, well, thank you for your honesty. Right? I appreciate that. And so they get married. I do the wedding. They get married. And a few months later, they start going back to the megachurch, which is great. I love churches, and I love every church. I don't care where they go. 6 months into the wedding, husband calls me. I got to get together with you immediately. Okay, what's going on, man? Well, I think we're going to split up. Our marriage is horrible. It's a pile. Can you get together? So I get together with him. Here's what I think you should do. Here's what I think I think you should go here. Here's a counselor I think you should see. Doesn't take any advice. A month later, he calls me. Can you meet with me again? So I get together with him again. What's going on? So finally, at the end of that talk, I said, hey, can I just ask you? You don't go to our church anymore. Why don't you call your pastor? I mean, I'm willing to meet with you, but why don't you call him? He's like, well, that's a mega church. I don't have access to him like I have access to you. I don't have his cell phone number. I can just text you. And I was like, okay. Well, vulnerability is one of our core values, so I guess there is a win there. And so I walk away from that conversation just kind of feeling used. This is pre-COVID. This is before I got text messages from people challenging my credentials as a pastor for getting vaccinated. This is before I got emails from people telling me that I was a Democrat because we required masks at Hope City. This is before people left the church because we put a hashtag Black Lives Matter hashtag on one of our posts. And they called me and said, I know you have 2 black kids, but that was way inappropriate. It's before all that. And so I started thinking this week, like, what am I cynical about? And so I'm going to go through the same exercise that I did last week that I'm challenging you to go through. I'm going to write down what I'm cynical about. You know what I'm cynical about? People. And what I realized this week is it's very difficult to be a pastor when you're in the people business and you're cynical about people. And so I just had to give that to God. Like, God, I am cynical. And so I don't know what you're cynical about. I don't know if it's your job. I don't know if it's your marriage. I don't know if it's your finances. I don't know if it's politics or the economy. You got to identify it. It's a place you have to start. And here's the deal. Here's what I know to be true. I'm not perfect, and I'm not a perfect pastor. And maybe you and maybe countless other people who don't go here anymore could write my name down, that I've hurt them or I've wounded them. So I'm not innocent in this. This isn't about who's right or wrong. This is about identifying the things in our life that have surprised us or wounded us or hurt us, and giving them a name. Right? That's important. And here's the second question you have to ask after you've done that. Who do you blame? Who do you blame? Now, given my example there, it would be easy for me to say, well, it was all their fault. And it would be easy to get to a place with whatever you struggle with, whatever you're cynical about, just to blame God, just like this is all God's fault. But I think we should dig deeper than that. And so I really wrestled with that question this week. Like, who do I blame? And you know who I blame for me feeling cynical toward people at times? Myself. Because you know what I think? Oh, I trusted them again. Oh, I let them in again. This is all my fault. Right? And so you have to identify who you're blaming. Are you blaming your husband? Are you blaming your wife? Are you blaming your ex-boyfriend from college? Are you blaming your boss at 2 jobs ago? Who are you blaming? And then finally, are you willing to be curious again? You see, cynicism is a defense mechanism at times. You can't hurt me if you don't have access to me. A few weeks ago, I got a text message from a gal who came to Hope City, and before the pandemic, she was pretty regular. And she texted me, she said, hey, Pastor Justin, I'm so excited. I don't know if you saw it on social media, but my fiance and I, we got engaged. I'm like, that is amazing, that's awesome. She's like, I'd just be so honored if you would do the wedding. And you know what I immediately thought? If she hasn't already, she's going to leave the church as soon as this wedding's over. Like, that was my immediate thought. And so I did not meet her text with excitement and with honor like I should have as a pastor. I met it with skepticism, questions, pre-qualifications. And so I sent a text back, and it wasn't mean, it was just kind of straightforward, like, hey, here's kind of where I'm at. and I did not let my wife read the text before I sent it. Major mistake, right? And so after I hit send, I said, hey, Trish, let me read this text to you. And Trish was like, whoa. She's like, you should not have sent her that text. She's like, you're making her pay for other people's wounds. And that's what cynicism does. It makes people that you love the most, that are innocent in your life, pay for what you haven't dealt with from life or other people. Curiosity is the antidote to cynicism. Cynicism says, of course it is. Curiosity says, I wonder why. This person's wounded me. I wonder why they're wounded me. Hurt people. What's going on in their life? Where are they at emotionally? How are they feeling? What do they have going on? Cynicism says it will never or it will always. Our marriage will never be better. We'll always be in debt. Curiosity says, what if? What if we went to marriage counseling? What if we created a budget? What if we went to FPU, Financial Peace University? What if? Cynicism says God would never. God would never provide. God will never bless me. Curiosity says God just might. God just might show up. God just might come through. God just might bless you. So as we close, I want to challenge you. What are you cynical about? What does God want you to be free from today? I want to invite you to stand with me, and we're going to go into a last worship song, and I want you to take what you're cynical about and crumble it up. If you're not cynical about anything, if you're just the most joyous person on the planet, that's phenomenal, and I admire you, and I want to be like you. But if you struggle with cynicism, maybe you want to come up and just throw it in this trash can on either side of the stage and just kind of give it back to God and say, okay, God, I want to be about curiosity this week. I want to invite you to stand as we worship together. Becca's going to come out and lead us after I pray. Let's stand together for prayer. And then as we sing, you're more than welcome in your own time to come up and just surrender that to God. Heavenly Father, we come to you and just in honesty and say, we don't want to be bitter. We don't want to be cynical. We don't want to have preconceived ideas of other people. We want to believe the best. And we want to set ourselves up to have a right relationship with you. So God, would you give us the courage to identify the things that we're cynical about? Give us the humility to admit the ways that we've been wounded. And give us the surrender to come up and just lay it before you and let it go. That's our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.